So we are live now. Prakash Singh, sir.
Okay. So, waiting for D'Souza to set the ball rolling.
I don't think she is joined in as yet, sir. So would you just want to sort of set the stage while she joins in?
Okay, if I have to start, then. Well, good afternoon and welcome to all of you, Mr. Mudgal, Mr. Raghuraman, and all those others who may be watching this program. We are here to discuss in the context of Police Reforms Day today. Today is a historic day for us. Not that public and the media has taken it that way, but for us it's a historic day because it was on September 22 that Supreme Court gave its verdict on police reforms. It has been a landmark judgment, and I think it will continue to be a landmark judgment, irrespective of the reservations and the hesitations and the obstacles that the state governments may be putting in the implementation of the directions. And I have no doubts that in course of time, this will provide the very foundation, the granite foundation, if I may say, for a robust criminal justice system. All we need is the political will to implement it. I think people in general are conscious. People say that, what have we achieved in the last 25 years? I think one thing that we have achieved, and it is intangible, imperceptible, is that public consciousness has been aroused. And the average individual knows that there is something like police reforms. And every time something goes wrong, the media and everybody says police must change, police reforms must be carried out. So public consciousness by itself is one of the major achievements, although intangible. I can't quantify it, I can't measure it, but it has been a significant achievement. And every time...
Faye has joined us, sir. Faye has joined us. Faye, we just started a little bit before Mr. Prakash Singh was telling the rest of us and of course those in the show what we were planning to do while we were waiting for you to join us. So
you can take over this stage now. I had started
I welcome all of you to this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. This is, of course, a very important day to talk about police reforms and to talk about the relationship that the police has with citizens in this country. So it's my pleasure to be invited to do this conversation with all of you. I'm sure our audience right now joining us on Facebook and on YouTube are familiar with the people in this conversation. I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to go back to the conversation that Mr. Prakash Singh was obviously already having, which is we've been talking right now about police reform for many, many years, and we haven't really had too much headway. There's a lot, Mr. Singh, that is said about what is standing in the way. Is it the lack of political will? Is it the lack of citizen interest and involvement? Is it the lack of will on behalf of the administration within the police? Why is it that we still don't have the reform that we were promised or we were instructed by the Supreme Court to bring in so many years ago? Mr. Singh?
What has prevented the Supreme Court directions from making progress on the ground or getting implemented at the ground level? I would like to analyze the essential factors. See, the most important factor has been that the political class is not willing to implement the directions. They think that if these directions are implemented, their control, their regulatory power, and their power, if I may say, to use and abuse and misuse the police, that would also go away, which they have been doing all along. So the political class as a whole is averse to implementing the Supreme Court directions, and they have been raising the most formidable objection to the implementation of the directions. Although if you examine it in very minutely, but that's a different matter. I think I'll come to that during discussions. So political control does not go over the police. It's just that political control is regulated in a manner that the abuses are minimized. That's one thing. And the bureaucracy also has been opposed to it. And I'm sorry to say that the bureaucracy, from the very beginning, they have been creating all kinds of obstacles in the implementation. And they have joined hands with the political class in this. In fact, the bureaucracy not only, they were opposed to the directions. They have made several attempts to scuttle the directions. I mean, there was an attempt to uh, the Ministry of Personnel issued an order which amounted to subverting the Supreme Court directions about the setting up of police establishment board. Somehow I was managed to stall that. It required tremendous effort. Then the Supreme Court direction regarding the tenure of the DGP. Again, the Home Ministry did something which was very weird. They said that the UPSC should take into consideration only those who have 2 years of service left. Now, I mean, that was somehow approved by one of the chief justices, but it led to a huge amount of confusion, and a whole lot of officers were left out of consideration for elevation to the rank of DGP. And I think they would have blamed me, but actually it was the MHA's mischief which prevented them from getting elevated. So bureaucracy has been opposed to it. The politicians have been opposed to it, and I would have no hesitation in admitting that a section of the police officers are either not enthusiastic or, well, they are even opposed to it. So that also must be placed on record. That within the police, it's not a total unanimity of opinion on the subject, and there are people who think that the old system was fine. I think these are people who have climbed up the ladder. Climbed up the climbed up the ladder by, hobnobbing with politicians, cultivating politicians, getting close to politicians, and they think that when they are about to reach the top, if a different system is in, they would be prevented from reaching the top. I think it is essentially that class which is hand in glove with the politicians. Anyway, whichever way, but a section of the police officers are not enthusiastic, and some of them are opposed to it. These are, I think, the main factors, and when, these are the major factors. I mean, there are several other minor factors also, but we need not go into those details. And I can proceed further, D'Souza, if you want. Otherwise, at this stage, others.
Mr. Singh, before I bring in the other guests, though, I do want to ask you. You have told us what the diagnosis is, but what is your recommended course of action? What do you think the solution? Where the
recommended? Yes. Yes. I mean, my recommended course of action would be A. See, firstly, they are low-hanging fruits. And why don't we start with the low-hanging fruits? Now, what are those? Now, in the Supreme Court directions, there is one direction about separation of investigation from law and order work. Now, this is least controversial, and in any of the affidavits, there is no fundamental objection to the implementation of this direction. They only say that this would require a lot of extra manpower, which we are not, which we don't have the. I mean, we don't have the finances to recruit that much manpower. Now, this is a problem which can be surmounted. I mean, their requirement of additional manpower can be worked out as a result of this separation, and the central government can come to their assistance, financial assistance. All right, here is the money, and you go ahead and recruit this manpower. It's not such a big deal, and I think this is one item which could be started immediately, and this would at least, as the Supreme Court direction says, it will result in improving the quality of investigation, and that is something very important today. I mean, we have been reading in the newspapers with the feeling of anguish, whatever the judges have been pronouncing on the investigation of Delhi riot cases. It's not a good reading. And it's high time that we improve the standards of investigation so that we don't get such adverse observations. And this will be possible if the separation is brought about. This is one. Then, mind you, police reforms do not mean only the Supreme Court directions. Please remember that the Supreme Court directions touch the core of police reforms. They are the heart of the problem. But there are limbs also. Just as an individual would have hands and feet and eyes and nose. Similarly, the heart of the problem they have identified, and to improve that, they have given those 6 directions to the state governments. But there are other aspects like filling up the vacancies. There are on date about 500,000 vacancies in police ranks across the country. Why can't they be fed up? I mean, once you have additional manpower, it would be easier to discharge your multifarious responsibilities and all the other items which are.
If you allow me, sir, to bring in the other guests, we have Mr. Raghuraman, who's a member of the executive committee of the IPF. Mr. Raman, do you believe that there are 2 routes? Obviously, one is not implementing the Supreme Court's recommendations on police reform can be or it could be contested as contempt of court. The other is we look at low-hanging fruit, see what the police administration can do themselves, see what citizens can do out of action. What do you think that the solution should be in order to build a stronger relationship between citizen and police in India?
Well, I mean, all of these things that you described are things that can be done. But to my mind, these are tactical steps. These are very, very tactical steps. The very fact that since the judgment of the court and to the contemporary time, more or less status quo has prevailed. There have been some minor tweaks, some minor, but nothing earth-shattering has happened in terms of the way any organization would consider or benchmark it to be reformed. My sense is that we can either potter along doing these tiny, tiny things, banging our heads, taking out a morcha every time a Nirbhaya happens, and sort of let the tide ebb to a point where it explodes and then it again is forgotten and it continues. Or a genuine groundswell has to be created in which an average citizen, like any other service, like a passport service or like a electricity service or like a gas service or a transport service, is first informed about what should be the basic services that they can expect from any branch of the government, including the police. And unless that becomes almost like a minimum standard demanded by the consumer, why would the elected representatives change that standard? Especially when the elected representatives have more incentive of conforming to status quo. So my sense is these tiny pinpricks or these periodic explosions of angst, they serve to remind, yeah, there is something that the Supreme Court said which the government is not doing, but it doesn't really move the needle. The needle, for it to move, we will have to get much more literally a groundswell whereby citizens start demanding that when we ask for a service, it should be within this time frame or this should be the behavior. And it is changing. It's changed in many other areas, as some of the examples I mentioned, where the sovereign provides those services. It's changed. I see no reason why it should not change, provided the consumer of the sovereign services is educated enough to demand that service as a right of a citizen.
Let me bring in Mr. Mudgal, Dr. Mudgal here. Dr. Mudgal, for our audience who aren't familiar, and I'm sure there are many who are, Dr. Vipul Mudgal is the director of Common Cause. It's it's a citizens forum that has been taking up a lot of very important issues. He also was a media scholar and a journalist for a very long time. Dr. Mudgal's latest, plea before the courts has been challenging the appointment of the Commissioner of Police Delhi. Which brings me, and the reason why I bring this up is to ask you about appointments and ask you about transfers. And do you believe that the fact that this is still largely done in a political sense is one of the reasons why the police will never be free? Vipul Mudgal.
Police has to work for the rulers of the day, then the appointments have to be done by them. Now it's a no-brainer. They want the appointments to be completely under them, not just to reward officers who are favorably inclined or who are sympathetic to some access to grind, etc. But also they don't want many honest officers to come up. And I'm talking about political class across the board. You see, look at the states and you'll get the clear picture. Like Mr. Prakash Singh said, I thought he put it very mildly when he said that the political class does not want it. My feeling is that, not just feeling, I think my impression is that all the states of India are in serious contempt of court when it comes to the implementation of the Supreme Court order. So if you have the Police Establishment Board, if you have the Security Commission, if you have the Police Complaints Authority, I think a lot of problems that we see on day-to-day basis would be solved. But you see, we see police reforms, Faye, as a law and order problem. I think police reforms, it must be realized by all of us that one, it cannot be left to political class or to retired police officers or to any one section of people. It is something which concerns our future as a democracy, as a economic power. We have all kinds of aspirations. We talk about India being an IT superpower and the third largest economy in the world, etc., etc. But if we are serious about going forward and being taken seriously by the rest of the world, I think we need to do police reforms, and not as a one time event, but as a continuous process. We must understand constantly, and as you said, appointments are a very important part of it, but appointments are part of the whole big machine. There's one cog in that machine, as Mr. Prakash Singh also said. The vacancies, you see the kind of vacancies which are there, the backward OBCs, the SCs, the STs, the minorities, the women. We studied 22 states. 22 out of 22 states have failed to fill their vacancies of the women. What could be the reason? Is there any political reason for that? And another thing I would like to say, that there are certain things which are very easily blamed on the politicians. Like we say that it is because of the interference or meddlesomeness of the political class that we are not able to implement police reforms. But which politician would want this kind of nonsense, like custodial deaths of a father and son in Tamil Nadu for opening their shop beyond the curfew hours? No, it's completely ridiculous. That I think there is something rotten which must be seen, and there is, it is like hitting the roof now. If we don't do it, we will be in serious trouble. Our democracy will be in trouble. Our system will be in trouble. Our economic progress, the future of our children will be in trouble.
It brings me to my next question, which is that how do we mobilize public support? Because all three of the panelists believe that the citizens need to be more involved, the citizens need to push for reform, the citizens need to demand reform from the politicians that are running the system. And Dr. Mudgal, I'll start with you. How do we mobilize more support from citizens or more interest from citizens in police reform?
I think, Faye, I mean, I get my heart breaks, when the citizens garland those police officers who are killing people in cold blood. I mean, politicians doing it is one thing, but common people coming out, in support of unlawful activities by the police is like really heartbreaking. So, it is very easy to say that the citizen sab kuch janta hai, citizen is like the sovereign in the country. But the fact is that the citizen also needs some amount of democratic training. We need some kind of legal literacy. We need to understand. I fully take the point that it is because of the failure of the entire criminal justice system that the people look at the hero cops, etc., etc. Ethos of the country will have to be strengthened, and I think public will have to be involved in policing. They will have to be, probably it should be in syllabus, in curriculum. We should be taught, people should understand that there is something called constitutional conduct. Constitution is like the holiest of holy books in the country. Once the citizens understand, and I'm not running down citizen, there is a large number of citizens who also believe that the police should be following the law. Police should not have any bias and discrimination. They also have high expectations, but as Mr. Raghuraman said, that there should be a demand, and demand better expectations will probably lead to better results.
Right. Mr. Singh, I'm going to bring to you the same question, but I also want to ask you, there is a general view that the police, is the police internally also, is the administration internally also pushing for reform, pushing for the right appointments, the right training, the right access to resources, or is it just considered, this is the way things are, this is the system we have to deal with?
In fact, soon after the Supreme Court judgment came, I wrote a letter to all the Directors General of Police. It figures in the book which I'm writing on the subject. The letter, it was the same year, 2006, I wrote that letter to all the Directors Generals of Police, and saying that while the Supreme Court has given these directions, but there is a lot that we need to do at our own level. And I emphasize that the points which I'm highlighting below, They do not require any financial allocation. No politician would have any objection to these. And these you can do with your own resources. These I call internal reforms within the police. Now you would say, what are these points which I emphasize? I said, the ambience at the police station. I said, this ambience has to improve. A man or woman, when he or she enters the police station, he should have this feeling of confidence that I'm going to a place where my grievance, where my problem, where what I have suffered would be looked into, and that the investigative machinery would be set in motion. He should have that much confidence. Why doesn't have that confidence? We should be at least received properly, treated properly, made to feel that yes, he or she has come to a place where he is protected and his grievance would be redressed. That feeling he doesn't get. Then the registration of cases. Why is there delay in registration of cases? I mean, of course, registration of cases is a huge problem. I won't be able to discuss that at great length. But by and large, when it is obvious that a crime has been committed, the case must be registered unless you have serious reservation that somebody is going to trap somebody or involve somebody in a false case. Otherwise, in normal cases, the report should be promptly registered and investigated. The behavior towards the complainant has to improve. Then our treatment of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities. This also, because in a large number of cases where you have the establishment on the one hand and the poor section on the other hand, we find that tends to be pro-establishment. It doesn't support the people who have very small voice or no voice at all. So, there are a lot of things which can be done internally within the department by improving their behavior, improving their registration, prompt investigation of cases, fair investigation of cases, and integrity. Who is asking you to take money? Tell me. And of course, there are cases where the chief minister said that yes, for my birthday, money should be collected and given to me. There are cases, like that. But otherwise, by and large, day to day, nobody is asking you, "Bhai, paisa le lo or uske baad kaam karo." Why do we get complaints that FIRs are registered sometimes after gratification is given? Now, these are things which have to improve. And this is where the responsibility of the senior police officer, the supervisory officers comes in, where they must ensure that there's a high level of integrity. Corruption is minimized, and people are given good, humane treatment. So, internal reforms, I think we need to start, and irrespective of what the government does or does not do, there's nothing to prevent us from carrying out these internal reforms, which which have no political overtones, and we do not require any extra money. It's just a question of changing your mindset, your attitude, your behavior.
Well, I do want to ask this question. At the end of the day, there is, like we have been told, not enough appointments are made. Mr. Raghuram, here's the question. We know that the police is supposed to have a certain number of women constables, certain number of women on the force, a certain number of representatives of specific castes, of oppressed castes. It's also understaffed. Why is that? Why is it that state after state we're not able to prioritize staffing of our police, training of the police, giving access to scientific methods of investigation, things like that?
So, Faye, I must confess that I'm probably not the best person to answer that question specifically because I'm not from the police. But let me speak from experience of any sort of a change management. So let me tell you a story from the corporate world. I remember many years ago, I used to head a company which is look at information security. And whenever I would go to a board and make a presentation to them, and the CEO said, information security is very important to us, but this year we don't have the budget. That's an oxymoron. If anything is important to the society, that important thing will be given the mind share. So all of these aspects, not having enough vacancies filled, not adhering to this, not being bothered about the code, these are all manifestations of the fact that as far as the normal citizen is concerned, this is good enough for them. And this is good enough, and the citizens are accepting it, so it will be accepted. I think the way out of this is not to appeal to the goodness of individuals and to say people should do this, people should not take money. By that logic, people should not steal also. They should not become thieves also. So I don't think expecting people to Of course, it will help, but adhering to a code of conduct will work. What needs to happen is to create a framework around. I'll give you two examples. One from the policing industry and one from not from policing. So let's take the first one, not from policing. And you're aware of this, as I'm sure everyone in this group and those listeners, that there's been a lot of talk about bringing diversity into the workforce. Now, bringing diversity into the workforce, and I'm not talking police, I'm talking the rest of the world, has two ways in which you can approach it. One is to have and it looks nice in our annual report and it seems the right thing to do, and we need to have all kind of colors in our senior management team. The other is to actually realize that diversity is a force multiplier. Your innovation becomes better, your product becomes better, your company becomes better. Now, let me give you an example, which is from policing. In the early 2000s, I think some of my co-panelists will remember it also, that there was this huge boom that was taking place in the BPO, the IT outsourcing to India. And because it was at its nascent stage and security protocols were not in place, there was a lot of cybercrime happening, including fraud. There was a major fraud that happened with a major company in Pune. You might remember that. It hit the headlines. And at that point of time, the nation and the government and the people realized that this lack of security and governance is going to affect us economically, in that we will not be able to get contracts from the first world. And so the NASSCOM, in conjunction with police, matter of fact, a very respected police officer who's also a member of the IPS, Mr. Nandakumar Sarvade, was seconded. A position was created and he was seconded by the NASSCOM to create that capacity to deal with it. So to my mind, if we really want to move the needle, we have to draw a connection between the lack of good policing and the actual economic GDP of the country. It may not be reflected in 1 or 2 years, but if this law and order state continues, if there is that sense that, in India, anything is manageable and all of that, serious players will find it very, very difficult to make investments. I have been the head of a security of a fairly large organization. And in that capacity, I've very often had conversations with my counterparts of other countries. And I can tell you this, that when many countries were moving from China during the exodus post the pandemic and considering other countries, one of the major factors which appeared as a disincentive in the head of risk of all of these MNCs risk matrix was the poor law and order situation in India. So this will actually impact us economically. I'm not talking about citizens not getting their rights. I'm saying that this will actually impact us economically. And as Mr. Mugdal pointed out, it's also going to start creating. So I think the one demography which should be really, really concerned about is the young police officers. Because the young police officers are going to inherit a police force, which, if it is not fixed right now, will be very, very difficult to manage. So I think we have to draw that link between a citizen's life today and in the future, between the country's economic progress between now and the future. And once that link is drawn, then to my mind, a framework will be established. But just wishing that people, out of goodness of their heart, policemen should become honest, judges should become honest, I don't think that's going to happen.
Dr. Mudgal, I want to bring you into what we've seen happen in Mumbai. At least as of now, the former police commissioner of Mumbai is having summons issued against him in the corruption case, which involved the 100 crore rupees that allegedly Anil Deshmukh asked for him to collect. People have been looking for him. He has not appeared. We don't know where he is. This is an unusual situation for the commissioner of police of such a large city to be untraceable by the police. It gives. From a point of view of a citizen, it leaves you feeling a little disillusioned as to who to trust. And I've heard many retired police officers also tell me that the entire force takes the color of the leader. And how do we know what kind of leaders we have at this point? Because we've talked just now about the Delhi police commissioner, now we're talking about the Mumbai police commissioner. Where does that leave the rest of the force? If these are the leaders,
let me tell you, let me take you back to the historic Supreme Court judgment. There was one of the directives was about the establishment of the Police Establishment Board for all transfers, postings, promotions, and service matters, particularly matters of suspension and revocation of suspensions. So there was a police officer in Maharashtra called Sachin Vaze, who was suspended apparently for a very long period of time, for
15
something like
years,
15
yes.
or 16 years,
Yes.
and suddenly he was brought back. So was there, if they had followed the Supreme Court guideline, if there had been a police establishment board of 5 senior most police officers, deciding whether this man should be brought back or not, so I think some of these things are directly connected to our desire not to kind of reform. And the second is that the political class, the way, particularly in corruption, etc., they are, it's to be seen that the police is being used in cities like Bombay and perhaps Delhi and many other places to collect money. I mean, it is unthinkable. And if this is happening, and then what does this guy go and do? He apparently murders another person who was his accomplice, who was his friend. He plants. He's accused at least of planting a jeep full of explosives in front of India's biggest industrialist. So now this is like going beyond, like the fiction, something that you read in stories and watch in movies, the Ab Tak Chappan and etc. etc. This is much more than that. What I am seeing very clearly, and in fact, after having done status of policing reports in 22, 23 states of the country, after having studied their behavior during pandemic, after seeing citizens trust and satisfaction in police and everything, we have come to the conclusion that there are certain patterns and practices which are getting ossified, which have become almost a way of life, which have become permanent, like bias and discrimination, when it comes to non-registration of crime. Do you know non-registration of crime is common, but even more common is non-registration of crime against women? Cases of dowry, cases of rape, cases of sexual assault, harassment, molestation, etc. These cases are more often than not even registered. Improper investigation, harassment of victims. In one of the surveys, we found that the witnesses are not willing to cooperate. I thought to myself, maybe witnesses don't want to cooperate because they will be harassed, they will have to go to court, they'll be called several times to the thana, they'll have to give testimonies, etc. But another study, we found that the victims, the person who has filed the FIR, who is the victim of the crime, is not wanting to cooperate with the police. There could be only one reason: he has no faith in the investigation. So there is a serious problem with the way investigations are conducted. And we have seen that the investigations are compromised either because of political pressure or because of the departmental pressure of the higher ups. Then there is excessive use of force, another kind of pattern which is emerging, that you have excessive use of force at every occasion within the thana, within the police station. If you are interrogating somebody, you are using so much excessive force that the person can die. When you are outside in the field and you are doing crowd control, then once again you are using excessive force. You can do in much less. Faulty investigation of cases, you know and the discrimination which you mentioned, you see that there such a large number of SC, ST and the minorities which are in the jails in India, one can say, are packed with people who are poor or who come from marginalized communities. And on the one hand, you have less representation of these people in the police force. And on the other hand, you have more representation of these people in the prisons. So there is something rotten out there. And I think before these things take us all down, we sink with it, we must first understand, as Mr. Prakash Singh also said, that what are the low hanging fruits, which are the areas where we have to train them, we have to constantly kind of build capacities of people, improve professionalism, etc., etc. I mean, you start talking about anything like that, their treatment to disabled, their treatment to mentally challenged, I think it's very, very subhuman. So there is something
And
wrong
to the
there.
transgender people, Mr. Dr.
Transgender people, so I think we have to, the way they conduct searches, the way they conduct surveillance. Now surveillance is such a big issue. The citizen is also saying, हाँ भाई मेरा surveillance करो, मेरे घर में भी कैमरा लगा दो, सब जगह कैमरा लगा दो, जहाँ नहीं है वहां भी लगा दो. So there is like a absurdity called surveillance, whether you need it or not. And then as a result, you have kind of millions of terabytes of information which is being stored every day. Nobody knows what is the protocol, how to use this information, how will you store this information, what will happen to the privacy of the individual. So I think there are multiple things. For me, if we have to take one thing, we should make a list of what are the patterns and practices which are getting ossified, which need to change. We can provide that list if you want. I mean, the non-registration of crimes, lack of professionalism, discrimination, definitely.
It's actually very well said. I want to bring in, Mr. Prakash Singh. You did mention in the beginning in your first answer about the statements being made, observations being made in courts. I just want to read one out to you, if I may. A bench headed by Chief Justice Ravana directed state police not to arrest their own suspended senior IPS. And in that particular case, there was a observation the bench made, and this is the observation. It is a very disturbing trend in the country that the police department is also responsible for this. When a political party is in power, police officials take the side of that particular ruling party. Then when another new party comes into power, the government initiates action against the police officials. This needs to be stopped. Police officers are working and siding with the party in power. This is actually a poor reflection, Singh, on the police force, but it does, of course, encapsulate everything we've talked about so far.
It's a statement of a fact. I don't contest what the Chief Justice of India has said. It is happening, and we have been witnessing this now for, you can say at least from mid-70s, we have been witnessing this in a very prominent way. That when a particular party is in power, the party ensures that officers loyal to it or known to it or officers whom it can trust, they are given positions of power, influence, and the most important postings. We have been seeing this. And of course, they have been using these officers for all kinds of purposes. There's a former chief minister on record who said, there's a public statement by a former chief minister of a state, "Hamare paas CBI hai." What do you mean by saying "Hamare paas CBI hai"? You're just threatening others कि हम CBI से आपको फंसा देंगे, गलत मुकदमे लगा देंगे. But such statements are made by politicians when they are off guard. So, this thing is happening. The Chief Justice of India is bang on target when he made this observation. The point is, what do we do? How do we prevent this kind of? That is where the question of insulating police from outside pressures. Mind you, this insulation may not be 100% possible, but let us achieve 60-70% of insulation at least. If you say that no, zero insulation, then you forget about it. Then you should be prepared for hell on earth. But some kind of insulation has to be given, and a police officer doing his duty as per the law of the land and the constitution of the country, he should feel protected. On the other hand, what happens is that if you go against the wishes of the politicians and you do something, even if you are conscientious and you have done that, even then you find that you are punished and you are prosecuted and you are harassed and sometimes you are even suspended. So this thing, he is bang on target, but the point is, how do we avoid this situation? You can avoid this situation only when you have given some degree of insulation to the police officers. And for insulation, the National Police Commission recommended. And a recommendation which was endorsed by Malumat Committee, by Rivera Committee, by all the committees, which Professor Madhav Menon Committee, every committee has improved this. That there should be a State Security Commission which should act as a shock absorber between the government and the police. The main job of this body would be to ensure that government does not interfere in the day-to-day functioning of the police, and it will also ensure that the police does not transgress the limits of law. This body has not been constituted. This body, and if it has been constituted, it has been constituted on paper, and the compliance has been farcical. So, if such a body were constituted, I think we'll get some measure of autonomy, some measure of insulation. And if you have some measure, and if there is even say a 55% chance that all right, while doing the right thing, I will be protected, and there's a mechanism which will come to my rescue. If I have that feeling, I will tend to do that right. But if I have a feeling that no, if I do this, the chances of my survival are only 5%. I mean, the majority of officers will say to hell with it, do it even if it is wrong, because survival for him becomes more important. No, the Chief Justice is bang on target when he said this. But for this, the Supreme Court must ensure that its directions are implemented. And let me also say this in this, bring on record in this context, that during the last 15 years, ever since the judgment was given, I have moved 5 contempt petitions at different periods of time, not against all the states, as somebody suggested just now, but against the most defiant states. And my idea was that let us make an example of these 4 states at least. Let these four
Yes.
states be hauled up, because if they are hauled up, then it would be an example for the remaining states. But for reasons which are beyond my comprehension, the Supreme Court never took cognizance of these contempt petitions, and they are they were just buried. That's all I can. That's my one of my regrets. That if the judiciary
But
is on
yes.
the one hand making this observation, it must also ensure that its directions are implemented, and whatever legitimate normal powers it has, those must be exercised.
But also, Mr. Singh, the fact that, and I don't know how many of our audience members understand this, the fact that police is a state subject, which means that each of these directions will have to be implemented by every single state. There is no silver bullet, is there? Even with the Supreme Court order or the Supreme Court directions and guidelines, for it to be implemented immediately in every single state.
No, Supreme Court directions are binding on the states. Just because it's a state subject doesn't mean that Supreme Court directions are not. They are binding on the states. But they find ways and means to circumvent, bypass, and subvert a direction, which is what they have been doing. Uh, the point is, there's the former Union Home Secretary. He's of the view, uh, and I don't entirely disagree with him. He said that the Supreme Court should, in one state, they should send the Home Secretary and the DGP to jail, and then other states will start falling in line. I don't know how far this is practicable or possible. I don't think the judges would go to that extent. But this is what an exasperated, decent, straightforward IS officer feels. And I don't entirely disagree with him.
Well, there's one last question I want to bring before the entire panel, and that is a question of the statement that was made saying the police, is a sovereign function. People should largely stay out of, what the police does. Should citizens get involved? And I know that I personally, as a journalist, have felt that citizens should be more aware of what's going on with the police. Who's getting transferred? Who's getting appointed? What kind of reputation does the top policemen in the force of my city or my state have? This is something I would like for citizens to be more involved in, but they aren't as involved. But to come back to whether or not the police have special powers that are beyond scrutiny of citizens, is it a sovereign activity that citizens should not get involved in, should not step into it? Dr. Wilson, you first.
Personal experience. I lived in England for many years, and I did not know seriously. In the two cities where I spent most of my years, in Leicester and in London, that who the police commissioner was, or who has been appointed, who's outgoing, who's incoming. It is a machine which should work in its own way. You will only come to know about who are the police officers in your city when something goes seriously wrong, when there is a terrorist incident and you see those people on television answering questions. Then the first time you realize that those are your police officers. Now here we see that police officers are, it's like a badge of honor. You become the police commissioner as if you are God's messenger on earth. There's nothing like that. I think if the institution works in the way it is supposed to work, and I think that is what the guidelines of the Supreme Court are, that you build an institution, there is a systemic method which you follow. For instance, a simple thing like a police complaints commission. Now, if somebody is wronged, person could be wronged by a lowly constable, or by a thanedar, or by whoever. You should be able to just go to one one office and say that, sir, this wrong has happened with me. File a complaint, go to the internet, submit your application. So the police complaints authority is again a no-brainer. It's something whose time had come, I would say, 20 years ago. It should be there. It's a great mechanism for collecting feedback also. You would know what is going wrong where. So I think it's the institutional arrangements which should be the focus. The second thing I would say is that it should not be taken lightly that the discrimination has become a way of life. You see, it is almost like the police we have. It's the best police that money can buy. If you are rich, if you are powerful, everything is going right for you. But if you're poor, there is a problem. We did a study during the pandemic, and we asked middle class people, sir, how was the police working? They were very happy. Middle class was like, no, no, they were very good. And they actually were quite good. There's no doubt that they were given a lot of responsibility. But when you come to the poorest, to the migrant workers, you suddenly see illegal arrests, a spate of cases of violence. You see, a lot of things they should not have done. Some people were going to the shelters provided by the, different agencies or NGOs, etc., and the police was stopping them from going there. So it's like it's almost like a criminal act at a situation like that, when millions of people are reverse migrating from big cities to small towns with their children and everything. And I'm not suggesting that the police they did not do good things. They did a lot of very good things. They went beyond their call of duty. They also fell victim to COVID. They did everything. But at the same time, when you do not have the training, we do not prepare people for anything, then they use their discretion. Somebody is going in a expensive car. He stopped, and the policeman asks, "Kahan ja rahe hain?" He says, "I'm going to buy medicines for my mother." Okay, go. Another person comes on a bicycle and he says, "मैं दवाई लेने जा रहा हूँ, पर्चा कहाँ है तेरा?" And he does not have a parcha. It's very, very often that a poor person can actually go to a medical store without a parcha, because he's going to ask the medical store for the medicine, and he's given a slap. In some cases in Madhya Pradesh, the people of criminal tribes, the tribals, they were even arrested for coming out when in the same place, same location, many others were let off. So this use of discretion comes in when the police are not made aware of the law or their rights, or they're not given basic training before there is a problem. So I mean, where do you begin? It's basically like, a lot is going wrong. And I think if we do not address it immediately, there will be serious problems. And I think as Prakash Singh ji said, either something drastic, like the courts say that enough is enough. You arrest people, or you do something like that, or a groundswell, which I don't see coming, by the way, because I see common people clapping when a lot of wrong things are done. So I think unless we become, responsive constitutionally, kind of, we understand the meaning of constitutional morality and conduct, etc., I think we can't leave it to the public.
Well, interesting. You brought up the idea of people clapping when wrong things happen. Specifically in Hyderabad, we saw when the Hyderabad police actually, there's no other word for it, executed 3 accused after the rape case was registered, largely to absolve themselves of not registering a case on time, not taking it seriously, not going out and looking for the young woman. If they had on time, they might have saved her life. In order to sort of just color over all of that, they just shot these people in cold blood, and they were welcomed with laddus and garlands by the citizens. But I also want to point out that many politicians since then, state politicians, members of legislative assembly, members of state government, have turned around and said that treatment was the right thing to do. In Karnataka, in several other states, and that worries me, because they're
That's tragic.
representatives of our constitutional system. They're meant to know better. They're meant to know more than the average citizen. And if they're also endorsing this sort of behavior, then it's a worrying system. Mr. Raghuram, how important is it And I know that this is the spiky way to climb the hill, but how important is it for our politicians to start taking this more seriously? It generally is not in their sort of selfish interest, but is in the interest of their constituents.
I think, Faye, you know this as well as I do, that if leaders look at the short term, if they look at short cycles, next promotion, next election, then most of the decisions will be tactical, and tactical decisions are usually not very good for the long term. I think if the politicians, and that is the reason why I also spoke about the junior police officers, who have the longest stake in this game, they are the ones who are going to be for decades serving with juniors, with pliant people. They will have to lead them. Unless the young politicians realize that they are going to inherit a society which will be fundamentally split into pieces, and they will be having a very, very ineffective force to deal. Let's understand one thing very clearly, and this I'm quoting an incident from my life personally. In 1984, I was in Mayur Vihar when the Sikh riots began, and there was this mob which collected there. And by complete chance, there were two beat constables in one cycle. They just appeared on the horizon, and the crowd, they didn't have any weapon, nothing, one danda. And the crowd ran. They ran. That is the moral positioning of uniform. Uniform is never, when we go for UN missions, we don't take thousands of troops there. We just take the uniform, and the society respects the uniform because there is a covenant between the society and the uniform. Once the society stops representing the uniform, no police force in the world has got enough numbers to manage something that starts breaking up. And I think that fabric, with due respect to the politicians, those who want to control the police, they need to know that the number of policemen that they can control, even if they control all 100% of them, is 0.00001% of the masses that they need to control. And if this one instrument with which they control them legitimately starts losing its legitimacy, then it will be impossible to control for any other reason also. So tomorrow there are communal riots, there is anger being represented against the government, there is a mass mandal kind of a situation which happens, then this police force, which is expected to control them with moral sort of standing, will not have that. And that, to my mind, Mugdal Saab, is also the reason why I think that the use of force is increasing. The use of force will only increase when the moral superiority reduces. There was a day when a constable or a sub-inspector of an area came and told the guys, "Chalo, chalo, bahut ho gaya, ab niklo aap log yahan se," and people would respect it. Today, that same constable has to open fire.
Let me then bring up this latest incident that's taken place in Haryana, where the SDM was seen on video giving instructions to the police saying "Sar pod do" of the protesting farmers who were on video protesting peacefully. They were, of course, blocking traffic, and they had created a inconvenience, but they were not violent. But it was seen, he was very clear about the fact that he said, "I want their heads broken if they breach this line." The farmers then went on another protest demanding action against that SDM. Do you see that perhaps also as evidence of the loss of moral sort of high ground by the police?
I wouldn't take this one incident to color the entire police. Besides, he was an SDM. He's not a police person. Having said that, and I would also, I've been a young officer. I would also, sort of wrong words to use, but I would also say that that is a little bit of hot-headedness in the way he was speaking to the troops. But I think the core reason doesn't lie there. The core reason, as we discussed earlier in the discussion, when the senior-most people are aligning themselves with center of power, what do we expect the people down the hierarchy to do? The reason why a person in a fancy car is allowed to go where a person in a bicycle is beaten is because that beat constable is aligning himself with power. He is not aligning himself with the constitution. He is aligning himself with power, not with duty, but with the source of power, not with what he's supposed to do, but where he can get more resources from. And why is he doing that? He is not learning it from the police manuals. He is learning it from the environment. So I think these elements are manifestations of that losing of control, which will happen whenever a force starts getting contaminated, any force, whether it's the medical force, teachers, you take any cohort, the moment they start deteriorating, using that cohort to deliver the end function will become more and more difficult and less efficient. And I think that's what the politicians, the next generation of politicians, need to understand, that if they allow the tactical decisions to override the quality of the police force, then the quality that they will inherit 10 years, 20 years down the line will be very, very different from what it is even today.
I'll give the last word, as I did give the first word to Mr. Prakash Singh on this matter, Mr. Singh. Your final words now at the end of this conversation on where that leaves us. And, it's a little disheartening also, because I remember on the last anniversary, exactly a year earlier, I had a similar conversation about what needs to be done, and we haven't moved an inch since then. Are we going to wind up just having this conversation once a year? Will there ever be a change?
Look, I'm optimistic about change. I know there are formidable forces in opposition to the process of reforms, because very strong vested interests are there. But I think I have not given up hope. I'm very hopeful, because I'm confident about the future of India. We have a great future, and we can't have a great future unless we have a modern, progressive police, which we shall have. And I'm sure, and I'm confident that sooner or later the political class will also realize that their own survival also depends on a police force which acts as per the law of the land. They have to realize it, and I think the day is not far when they will have to realize it. And maybe one day it will also become an electoral issue. And the day it becomes an electoral issue, that we need a progressive police, we need a police which conforms to the directions of the Supreme Court, or which conforms to the recommendations of the National Police Commission. I mean, the day this becomes an electoral issue, you can rest assured changes will come about. And those people, to those people who think that no changes have taken place and that all this exercise has been futile, I would like to tell them that there are several changes which are taking place below the surface, which people are not able to see in black and white. And so they say the no changes. You see, firstly, as I said at the very beginning, public consciousness about the need, about the relevance, about the urgency of police reforms has been aroused. Now, someday somebody will be able to mobilize this consciousness and develop this into what we call here a groundswell of public demand for police reform. That will happen. Secondly, if you analyze the state's performance, you'll find every state, whatever they may do on the ground, but when it comes to paper, they are on the defensive. They're on the defensive. They always project before the Supreme Court that no, we are complying with your directions. So willy-nilly, some partial compliance is there. It's not, the situation is not that bad. Willy-nilly compliance is there. Of course, there are different categories of states. There are some states which have done satisfactory performance, which have states which have done less satisfactory, and states which have done unsatisfactory performance. But some degree of progress is there in the direction of implementing Supreme Court directions. It is tardy, it is hesitant, but it is there. And I think the day our political class makes up its mind that yes, this is an instrument which we need for our own survival as a democracy also, the day they realize it, I think that would be the day of deliverance. And I am sure police reforms will come about, because unless we have police reforms, the democratic structure would be at a stake. The economic progress would be jeopardized. And what about the internal security problems? I mean, if you want to really get on top of the internal security problems which are confronting us, whether it is in Jammu and Kashmir, or whether it is in the northeast, or whether it is in central India where Maoists are running riot, you need a professional police which is dedicated, committed, and which is able to deliver punches. So there's no getting away from police reforms either way. I mean, whichever way you look at it, whether you look at it from the point of view of daily law and order, whether you look at it from the point of internal security in the country as a whole, whether you look at it for the democratic structure or the economic progress, there is no getting away from police reforms. And I think the day this realization sinks in the minds of politicians, we will have it one day.
Right. I'm going to leave it there, and I hope that your words become true very soon. Mr. Singh, thank you so much. The rest of my panel, Mr. Raman, Mr. Dr. Budgal,
Thank you,
it's been a pleasure to speak with you here. Here's hoping for the reform that we actually need within the police force: more resources, better funding of our police forces, better staffing, access to scientific investigating resources, access to the ability to train people as specialized detectives, which again is something that we need. Not so much pressure perhaps on bandobast and VIP security, which is where unfortunately a large amount of our force gets used up. But we do hope that the next time we have this conversation on the next anniversary, that we would have made more headway. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Do remember to track the rest of the events that are happening on this anniversary and take a look at everything else that's going on. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much. Thank you.